type of words add to the verb? We learn to paint the predicate or the verb by answering what questions. This can be done with adverbs or prepositional phrases. Moving predicate painters around in your sentence is a great way to create variety in sentence structure. When you move a predicate painter phrase to the beginning of a sentence, it has to be set off from the rest of the sentence with a comma. The comma separates the extra information about the predicate from the subject part of the sentence. For readers, it's a cue to pause and consider the information the phrase provides. It's important to realize that commas are not randomly placed. They help us group words together that belong together. Now turn in your student books to page 63. Let's look at the sample sentence. But before we do, let's read our directions. Use your answers to the following questions to create sentences. Answer the predicate painter questions with prepositional phrases or adverbs. When the sentence begins with a prepositional phrase, it is followed by a comma. Now back to the sample sentence. The prepositional phrase after school has been placed at the beginning of the sentence. What's the subject of the sentence? That's right, athletes. What's the action verb? Played. What tense is the verb? Yeah, the ed lets us know that it's past tense. What did they play? Soccer is receiving the action, so it's called the direct object. Do we know where they played soccer? When I write the complete sentence, I have to remember to add a comma at the end of the adverb phrase after school. It needs to be separated from the subject part of the sentence. Now, I want you to write sentences that match the remaining patterns. Make sure you add the necessary punctuation to each sentence. We're going to go over these as soon as you are finished. What words take the place of nouns? Using pronouns makes our speech and writing more efficient because we use them instead of repeatedly using the nouns they replace. Pronouns also help establish point of view within a text. Now turn in your student books to page 64 and reference the chart. What are the first person pronouns? This list includes more than just subject and object pronouns. What first person pronouns are subject pronouns? Which ones are object pronouns? Which ones are possessive pronouns? When does a narrator or author use first person? What are your second person pronouns? The pronoun you can refer to more than one person and functions as the subject and object pronoun. When does a narrator or storyteller use second person? Let's take a look at third person pronouns. The list is quite long compared to the other categories. What are the subject pronouns? What are the object pronouns? Which ones are possessive pronouns? When would a narrator use third person? Take special note of the pronouns mine, ours, yours, hers, and theirs. We use these pronouns when the object they possess does not follow the pronoun in the sentence. Let's look at some examples. That is my blanket. That blanket is mine. It is mine. That is her car. That car is hers. It is hers. Notice that it does not have blanket and car after the second and third sentences. We're going to be looking at Thank You, Ma'am, and the two poems that we've read in this unit. Let's take a look at the three text selections in this unit and determine the point of view in each one. We will focus on the pronouns to determine the point of view. So to complete the rest of this page, I want you to identify the point of view in each selection, then cite pronoun usage to support the chosen point of view. You're going to end up writing this information on the page. We read the poems If I Were in Charge of the World and We Real Cool in the last lesson. Now we'll have a chance to look at their form and content. What is poetry? Poetry is literature written in verse. Poets write stories that rhyme or have rhythm. Not all poems rhyme. Some create rhythm through alliteration. Listen. Pete the poet picks particular patterns. What did you notice? Alliteration is when you use words that have the same sound in the beginning. Say alliteration. Some poems don't have rhyme or rhythm. Poems without much rhyme or rhythm are called free verse. What are poems called that don't have much rhyme or rhythm? Many poems have distinctive signs or elements. Let's take a look at 6 elements or characteristics of poetry. Turn to page 65 and kind of skim through the list in the chart. Thought. A poem has a message or theme. What would you say is the overall message in If I Were in Charge of the World? How about We Real Cool? Imagery is another element in poetry. The words in a poem are typically chosen to create a vivid picture in the reader's mind, one that will help communicate the theme. Choose one of the poems that we read. Think about the image that you created in your mind's eye about that poem. Tell me about it. A poet strives to choose words that will create a certain mood or feeling. Some poems are dark and melancholy, while others are light and playful. What kind of mood do you think the poet tried to create in If I Were in Charge of the World? How about We Real Cool? Many song lyrics would qualify as poetry. The arrangement of words, unusual sentence or phrase structure, and rhyme contribute to the sense of rhythm or melody. Which poem uses rhyme patterns to create a sense of melancholy? Some say that We Real Cool reads like the lyrics of a jazz song. It is an example of beat poetry. This kind of poetry is meant to be read aloud. What rhyming pairs are in We Real Cool? In more sophisticated poems, such as sonnets, the poet consciously chooses words to build a certain number of syllables and units of stress. Meter, or a set pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables, is another way poets create rhythm. What did you notice about the number of syllables of each word in We Real Cool by Gwendolyn Brooks? Form refers to the physical structure of the poem. Some poems have set forms while others do not. A poem with a set form would have a certain number of lines, a certain meter, and a certain rhyme scheme that contributes to its meaning. A poem without a set form might have varying line lengths and no rhythm at all, no rhyme at all. Compare the physical structure of both poems. Discuss observations with your partner. Let's apply the 4 traits to the poem, If I Were in Charge of the World. Listen as I reread the poem and think about the message within the poem. What does the poet want us to take away from the poem? If I were in charge of the world, I'd cancel oatmeal, Monday mornings, allergy shots, and also Sarah Steinberg. If I were in charge of the world, there'd be brighter nightlights, healthier hamsters, and basketball baskets 48 inches lower. If I were in charge of the world, you wouldn't have lonely, you wouldn't have clean, you wouldn't have bedtimes, or don't punch your sister, you wouldn't even have sisters. If I were in charge of the world, a chocolate sundae with whipped cream and nuts would be a vegetable. All 007 movies would be G, and a person who sometimes forgot to brush and sometimes forgot to flush would still be allowed to be in charge of the world. What does the poet want us to take away from this poem? I want you to write those ideas in the thought row. Now think about imagery. The poet doesn't use a tremendous number of adjectives or descriptors, and yet creates vivid imagery. How does she do that? What is the mood of the poem? Is it serious, gloomy, humorous? I want you to go ahead and jot down your ideas for both imagery and mood. How does the poet create a sense of rhythm or melody in this poem? Go ahead and jot down your ideas for how the poet creates a sense of melody. Understanding the elements of poetry can help us read and interpret a poem the way the author intended.